What is happening, guys? Captain speaking, and today we are talking episode 2 of Kamen Rider Zi-O. Now, for starters, I didn't exactly hate this episode. I thought it was okay at best, but at the same time, I also kind of thought it was somewhat of a convoluted mess, for reasons that I'll get into later in the review. So the episode starts off exactly where we left off last week, where Gates finally catches up with Sogo after he has defeated another build, and Tsukiyomi attempts to step in and try and thwart the fighting for reasons unknown even to herself. So then this hilarious bike chase ensues, where Sugo eventually ends up escaping Gates by jumping off the side of the road and hiding. And not long after, he's met up with what's his name? Walls? Yeah, Walls. From the year 2068, and he gives us some exposition, I guess, as to what's going on so far and who he is and why he's here. So apparently he's supposed to be Zi-O's right-hand man. So he comes to the year 2018 to try and protect the timeline as it is, to keep it the same, to make sure that Sogo stays on the path to becoming Zi-O eventually. And on the other hand, you have who are called the Time Jackers, and their sole purpose is to try and change the timeline to make sure that Zi-O doesn't become king, but rather campaign for other people to become another riders with their rider watches, and to see if they can become kings in his place. At least that's the best way I can explain it. That's the explanation that Wool gave us. And then on the other hand, you have Gates and Tsukiyomi, of course, who are just trying to get rid of monarchy altogether. So yeah, Wall's main mission is to keep the timeline intact, and if I could go off on a bit of a tangent here, I have a little theory about Waz too. I think that he'll eventually end up becoming a villain for the series, because if Sogo strays far enough from the path of becoming Zi-O, I could just see Waz just kind of becoming a thorn in their sides, just like trying to get in their way, just to try and make sure that his mission is complete. And come hell or high water, like, he'll get that mission done. So yeah, I could definitely see him becoming some kind of antagonist later on down the line. So in the scene after that, Tsukiyomi and Gates come across another build again, and they're confused as to why he's still up and running, because they destroyed him in the previous episode, of course. And thus, this is where my problem with the episode comes in. So we cut away back to Woz and Sogo, and Woz is explaining to him that he can't defeat another build as he is right now because the Time Jackers had altered history or whatever at some point. So then Sogo comes in and saves Gates and Tsukiyomi from another build, and he ends up defeating him, and just as they said before, or just as they predicted, he comes back, he respawns. And then Sogo tries to seek out the help of Sento and Ryuga from Build to see if they can offer any assistance. But then when he gets to the cafe, he finds out that they have no clue who he is, and they don't remember who he is at all. This is another confusing aspect, but you can chalk this up to the Time Jackers, altering time, making their own version of Build so that the actual build doesn't come into fruition, so I guess that makes some sense there. But then when Gates ends up defeating another build a second time, that does something to where they get their memories back, and it refreshes their ride watches, and they know who they are now. So then Sento gives Sogo the ride watch and tells him to give his past self his regards, and this gives Sogo the idea to travel back to the year 2017 with Gates to see if they can try and stop another build there when he was first created. So they hop in those robot time machines, and then they're on their way. So back in the year 2017, Sento and Ryuga are met with another build, and they transform instantly. But as they're fighting, they realize that their powers are fading, and I think that has to do with the timeline. It's in the act of being altered, so I guess their powers are fading as a result of that, to the point where they never existed. So when Sogo and Gates first arrive, they're instantly met with Wool, excuse me. He stops time temporarily to explain to them his whole exposition as to what he's doing and how they're trying to overthrow Zi-O with another king and whatnot. It's what I said earlier. And then he also explains that the host for another build, that he was supposed to die in that car accident from last week, and goes into this whole metaphor about how he's changed the hands of time for him and whatnot. And Solo gives him that same lecture that his uncle gave him last week about how we can change the hands of a clock, we can stop the hands of a clock, but that's just not how life works, and life still goes on, and we make our own futures, and yada yada yada. Sentimental stuff, you know. So with that said, Wool eventually backs down and lets the fight ensue, and resumes time. So Sogo and Gates transform and fight alongside Build and Cross for about 40 seconds to a minute before they lose their powers completely, and Sento tells him that it's up to him now to defeat another Build. And then after seeing Gates demonstrate his Ghost Rider Watch powers, or his Ghost Armor time once again, that gives him the idea to activate the Build Ride Watch. And we are thus introduced to our first alternate form for the season, Armor Time Build. So with a little bit of teamwork, Zi-O and Gates are able to plow through another build. And on top of that, they're able to save his host so that he actually never ended up experiencing that car accident in the first place, and he could just continue living his life as he pleases. So after the fight and everything is calmed down, we see Sogo give Sento and Ryuga these two blank ride watches, and of course those are going to be the Build and Cross ride watches that they build in the year 2018 that they give right back to Sogo, as we just saw here. It's kind of like it's a whole 360. So that somewhat makes sense here too. So in the next scene, we see Gates talking to Tsukuyomi about the fight that just happened, and he explains that even though they had just defeated another Build, the actual Build is still missing from history, and that things are still on track for Sogo to become Oh My Zi-O. So they then concoct this plan to rent out the vacant space in Sogo's uncle's apartment to keep a close watch on Sogo for now, and also to keep tabs on the timeline to see if they can still alter things at all. And of course, things are still somewhat shaky between Sogo and Gates, as he says that he's still itching to take him out still. So there's that, and then the episode ends with a narration from Woes teasing X8 for next week, so that's really interesting. And that's the episode. So, my thoughts all in all, like, this really wasn't a bad episode, but it was still just kind of, like I said before, a convoluted mess, because things got pretty confusing as to how the timeline with Build worked. Like, how would they still even have their powers in the first place if another Build already exists? If the time jackers had already altered the timeline, then how do their powers still exist at all for them to even fade away like that? And plus, I may or may not have missed it, but I'm not quite sure where Sogo got those two extra blank ride watches. Like, we see the two ride watches that Ryuga and Sento give him in the beginning of the episode, but then we also see him give the cross one to Gates to use as well. So that means he only has one extra ride watch on hand, so I'm not quite sure where those two other blank ones that he gives to Sento and Ryuga at the end of the episode came from. So, yeah. Now it's way too early to determine whether or not this series is going to fail at all, but I think with things being this confusing already, being on only the second episode, it somewhat worries me, but not too much though. Like, this show has plenty of time to improve on itself. But then again, this is time travel we're dealing with here though, so I mean, things are bound to get somewhat confusing regardless. But yeah, that's my piece on it. So tell me in the comments section whether you guys were confused as well or not, because I've heard a lot of people say that they were confused as well about the plot of the episode. And be sure to check out my Facebook page at Midwest Tokusatsu. Link will be in the description. And this is your captain, signing out.